President Trump says that a U.S. China trade deal is on the horizon.
I have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Xi. We're in the final throes of a very important deal. I guess you could say one of the most important deals in trade ever. It's going very well, but at the same time, we want to see it go well in Hong Kong, and I think it will. I think that President Xi can make that happen, and I know him, and I know he'd like to make it happen.
For a closer look at the trade talks, let's welcome John Rutledge. He is Chief Investment Officer at Safanad. That's an honorary professor at the Chinese Academy of Sciences and also a CNBC contributor. Also, Dean Pinkert, who is former commissioner of the U.S. International Trade Commission. He's now trade practice partner with Hughes Hubbard International. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. Dean, let's start with you.
Good morning.
President Trump just said a very interesting series of things. First of all, that, yeah, it does look like we're in the throes of a final reach for the deal like this, but he also said things have to go well in Hong Kong. Does it surprise you to hear Hong Kong brought up as part of what goes into all of this?
Good morning, Becky. Of course, it's not surprising to hear Hong Kong mentioned in this context, particularly because Congress has weighed in on Hong Kong, and the president has to walk a fine line on that. But more broadly, the president needs to change the narrative on trade and change the narrative generally in Washington. And he needs to show that the pain of the tariffs that has already been experienced here in the United States is leading to positive outcomes for U.S. workers and U.S. companies. So I expect that a highly motivated president will keep pushing toward a deal so that he can show a win.
Show a win, but if you think it needs to prove that the pain's been worth it, I guess you also think that a deal that's too skinny won't get done. It's got to have a little bit of meat on the bones?
Well, I think that the true test from a policy point of view on whether this Phase 1 deal is successful is whether it has progress on the structural issues. I'm talking about intellectual property. I'm talking about technology transfer. Those are the kinds of issues very tough to crack that we need to have some progress on. And I think more broadly, again, that it's not just that there's progress on those issues, but that there's enforcement of any progress.
John, from the Chinese perspective, how likely is something like that to happen?
Well, we have to actually have something that looks like it's happening rather than actually does happen. I agree with Dean that we've got both sides now really need a deal. And, I've met with our trade team on this. China is already making progress on IP issues, not so much because we've forced them, but because they have internal pressure to do it. Your story before this was about Alibaba and the richest man in China. There's a huge IP political lobby force now building in China. That'll eventually get the playing field changed somewhat. But, China's having trouble right now, and the trouble is partly tariffs, but it's also that they've got a credit freeze happening for their private companies because the Bank of China's efforts, People's Bank of China's efforts to get credit flowing to stimulate the economy really haven't worked. So Xi needs a win, too. Xi, however, knows that Trump's election is approaching one day at a time, so he's not really in a big hurry to deliver anything.
John, did you read the essay by Li He in the People's Daily a week ago? And what did you think of the ideas they had on enforcement of intellectual property and where that's going?
I've thought that's been the trickiest issue from the beginning. Some of the issues that we tried to get, give up on your technology program, give up on your state-owned companies and all that, never going to happen. But on the IP side, you can get definite progress. What you're not going to be able to do, however, is walk around China with a clipboard. I was suggesting to our trade team that the way to do that is to take the 110,000 American business people who are now living and working in China and use them as your information network to help understand what's being enforced and what isn't being enforced. The other thing that's happened in the last year, and this is a year ago now, China has established a central court in Beijing for hearing IP cases that used to be heard in city courts dominated by local mayors, who, as we all know, are the source of the corruption in China. So there's things that are beginning to happen there. They're just happening more slowly. but they could certainly do a deal with soybeans, some IP progress, and some tariff rollbacks. That would make both guys look like a winner going into the holidays.
John, one quick one. What happened to energy? At some point, they were talking about LNG purchases and the like. That seems to have slipped from the stories coming out about this.
Well, the interesting thing to me about international trade is when you do trade deals, it's politically very finely targeted. You can actually specify which kind of steel you can put a tariff on. So the political motives for getting energy to happen are very powerful, too, especially for President Trump at this point.